Hello everyone, welcome to Keen here. So yeah, it's been a little while since my previous collection update video, or indeed any video quite honestly. I'm not going to go into the details as to why, simply because it's not really that interesting quite honestly. So instead let's just jump in to all the bits and pieces that I'm going to be showing. I'm going to start off with a couple of books. The first of which is this one. It's an oral visual history by the Red Hot Chili Peppers with Brendan Mullen. I'm not quite sure who Brendan Mullen is. But anyway, I picked this up. Actually, it was a present. Somebody gave me this around Christmas time. So yeah, I've had it quite a while. I haven't quite honestly read any of it. This is like one of the few times I've actually picked this up, or since I got it really. And yeah, it's mostly photographs anyway of the band. There's not, I don't think there's a great deal to actually read in this. But yeah, it kind of picking this up, it kind of gave me a new sort of interest in checking out their most recent albums. They released two albums last year, and I wasn't too overly keen on them to begin with. I thought they were pretty good, but they didn't really win me over to any great extent. I have reevaluated them, and I do think they're pretty good. There's things about them, bits and pieces here and there, which I actually think are pretty good. Overall, though, I don't think they're the best of the best or anything. But anyway, that's the Chili Peppers. We'll move on now to this book by Ronnie Wood. It's his autobiography simply titled Ronnie. And yeah, I have actually read this book. I read it cover to cover, and it's pretty good. It doesn't really stack up. There's some photos in it. It doesn't really stack up that highly against something like Life by Keith Richards. I think that's the main go-to autobiography at this point in time, unless Mick comes up with an autobiography anytime soon, which is somewhat unlikely because I have heard that he is a guy who likes to look forwards rather than look backwards. But I think an autobiography by Mick would be amazing. Really, I think he's definitely got some good stories in there and that sort of thing. So yeah, hopefully one day he kind of does that. Although as at this point, it remains to be seen. But yeah, this is a fairly straightforward, simplistic kind of novel autobiography. I did, it's something you can kind of just sort of casually read and that kind of thing. It's not very taxing or anything like that. One of the things that stuck out about this book, which I thought was kind of the most interesting aspect about it, really, was the fact that Ronnie would go from essentially rags to riches. He would, he earned most of his money through the Rolling Stones. As a member of the Rolling Stones, of course, and he'd make money through, the bulk of his money through touring due to the Rolling Stones sort of system of only having writing credits for Mick and Keith. So yeah, they don't really make the other members of the band don't really make a great deal of money through royalties and that kind of thing. So it's basically touring that's where they make the majority of their cash. So between tours, you know, Ronnie would basically just spend kind of like ludicrous sums of money, all these, all kinds of different things. They'd spend it on some of them, businesses and that kind of thing. Some of them just drugs and alcohol and parties and that kind of thing. So yeah, he'd basically go bankrupt, and then he'd have to tour again, as a member of the Rolling Stones, and he'd become a millionaire, and he'd spend it all, between the next tour and that sort of thing. It was just a vicious cycle of spending and earning. He does admit in the book that he is a fantastic earner of money, but he's also arguably a better spender of money. So yeah, that's one of the things that kind of stuck out for me. It was kind of incredible, really, the wealth and the rags to riches, and then riches to rags and rags to riches. Kind of it's, unbelievable amounts of cash that's kind of just come through his fingertips. So yeah, if you're gonna read like I said, an autobiography by Rolling Stone member, go for maybe Life over this. But this is something you go for this as well after you've read Life and you want more, of course. These are the only two autobiographies I've read by members of the Rolling Stones. So yeah, out of the two, I'd go for Keith's one. This is pretty good. Also, check her out, of course, if you're into Rod Stewart as well. He gets more than a few mentions in there. So we'll move on to some vinyl now. We'll keep it with the Rolling Stones. And I picked up this somewhat recently. This is Out of Our Heads. Now, I do actually have I already have a copy of this album, but this was like an upgrade copy. I've been trying to upgrade some records recently. This is the only one, by the way, that I've managed to upgrade, so I'm not doing that great really, but this is at least a better copy than the other one I've got. The other one, it's kind of an okay copy. You know, you can sit there and you could listen to it. There's a few, you know, it's a bit of a rough copy, but it's playable and that sort of thing. And I kind of just, you know, just sort of stuck with it, sort of thing. But I've always been meaning to kind of upgrade it and get a slightly better one, and I managed to do that. This is a nicer copy. I picked this up on eBay, and it was like just under £20, so it's quite a good deal, really. It's not a mint copy or anything like that, but it is an original or close to an original, mono press, which is what you want for this record. This was a mono recording. They only did mono for these songs. You know, they didn't do any stereo. I think it was the last proper, only mono recording that the Stones did. And yeah, it's got the original in the sleeve and all that kind of business. So yeah, it's a fairly nice copy. It's not a great copy or anything, but it's nicer than the other one. So I'm kind of happy really. I managed to upgrade it successfully because of course there's nothing worse than trying to upgrade a record and you end up with something maybe even worse than what you started out with. That's like the worst case scenario. And I've actually done that a few times. That's part of the reason why I like to get a nice copy first and foremost, rather than get a slightly rough one and try and upgrade. And then, of course, when you upgrade a copy, it's like what you do with the slightly rough one. You're gonna. I don't like selling things. I find a pain in the neck and giving things away and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I like to get just the first time round and not upgrade, but whatever. I did it in that case, and I'm happy with the result. So all's well that ends well, I suppose. So anyway, next record is this. This is Viva Roxy Music. I picked this up actually in a record shop in Chester. I believe it was £12. The Stones record I've just shown, by the way, was I picked her up on eBay. Generally, I pick things up on eBay, but I was in Chester recently and I was flicking through. The shop was about to close. I got there within like an hour of them closing. So I had to get a move on really and flick through everything. And I saw this and thought, what the hell? It's £12 and it's a fairly nice copy. They do tend to have nicer, records at this place. They very. I don't think they sell any sort of ropey records, anything particularly bad, unless it's marked down. They tend to have quite a good quality control and that kind of thing. Comes with the original Island sleeve. Nothing particularly interesting about the label or anything. Sort of a half custom Island label, and yeah, it's a very good live album. It's a strange one though. It's not like one recording from one show. They've actually recorded this from, I believe, 3 different shows from 73 to 74 to 75, and they've kind of put them all together into this one record. I guess what they did is they got several recordings and they picked the best versions of certain songs and put them all together, which is actually a pretty good idea. You get like the best of really, because of course if you listen, the amount of times I've listened to a live album where you get a particular song and they went that song, whatever it was, or that piece just wasn't that great compared to the other stuff. Maybe the band are a bit out of breath or something like that, or somebody messed up somewhere. So this is not a bad idea really to get the best of the recordings, and it's a very good live rock. The band are just really tight at this time. They're still relatively young. This is it's a mid-70s release. One of the things that I thought was pretty good about it was it's sort of like the swan song really of like the classic period. It's Edwin Jobson's final, in terms of Roxy Music anyway. It's his final album, it's the final thing that he worked on for Roxy Music. He of course is the replacement for Brian Eno. So when Brian Eno left, he took over and he was with the band up until this point. This is the last sort of instance of Roxy Music really, and there he is there. And he does look a bit like Eno really. He does have this sort of Eno element to it. I guess that's part of the reason why he was taken on. And I think he's the most underrated Roxy Music member really. I really do. He's somebody who's a bit overlooked to a certain degree. I guess because he was in there for like so many of the great albums. You think, you know, Stranded and Country Life and all that. He was on some really great Roxy Music albums, and yeah, he's definitely a Roxy Music underrated sort of legend as far as I'm concerned. So anyway, we'll move on to the Kinks. This is Something Else by the Kinks. I believe this album came out, was it 19, it says on the back here, 1967. And this is not an original, unfortunately. You know, it's a modern reissue. I picked this up on HMV. It was like $15.99 in their sale, and it's been on sale at HMV a few times over the years. And whatever, for one reason or another, I'd always miss out and picking up a copy. And this instance, I was sort of like, it's not gonna pass me by again. I sort of picked up a copy on their eBay account. Actually, HMV's eBay account, picked her up, and it's a really nice copy. They do a great job of shipping and all that kind of thing. They really package things very well. So yeah, HMV definitely, and I believe their main sort of flagship is opening up again in London. Is it Leicester Square? The flagship, branch really is reopening. So yeah, things seem to be looking up. Maybe, I guess, maybe perchance for HMV. But yeah, no original labels on this one, but it is what it is. This would have been what labels would this have had? This would have had it would have had it was a Pie. It was on the Pie label, of course, in the UK anyway. And yeah, it's an album I need to really listen to a whole lot more than I have. But my Kinks collection is growing sort of steadily. Anyway, speaking of collections that are, you know, sort of nearing completion to a degree. Although my Kinks collection is quite honestly, in terms of their classic albums, it's most, it's kind of complete. We'll move on to some artists which, I really am nearing the end, very, very close to, or in certain cases, I have completed. One of those collections is Prince. And everything else now is going to be CDs. I've got quite a few CDs to get through. I'll go through these relatively quickly, I suppose. Hit and Run Phase 1, one of Prince's final albums to come out. And yeah, I've only listened to this a handful of times really, but it's pretty good. It's somewhat tricky to pick up this album now, I've noticed. Not that it's rare or anything like that. If you go on eBay, you expect to find this for like 50p, like so many CDs are these days. You might be a little bit surprised to find that it's a little bit more pricey than that. It's a little bit harder to come by. I think it's maybe due a reissue, a reprint and that kind of thing, which I guess is only a matter of time. It only came out in 2015, so yeah, about a year before Prince passed on. And it's weird listening to this because it's almost like a sort of full circle almost in time. This album actually opens with the track For You, which is basically the opening of his first album. So yeah, it's almost like a 360 sort of thing going on. And yeah, Prince plays around with a lot of different musical styles, of course, which you expect, but an unbelievable degree. There's some tracks on this which he just flips between musical styles, just on like just on, just at pure ease really, and it's pretty incredible to listen to. Certain parts. It's not a brilliant album. It's somewhat generic in places. It's a little bit, it's not really Prince at his best, really. To a great degree, but or to some degree, should I say? But it's still a good album. And one thing I've noticed with his later albums, nothing really truly up to this point anyway truly stands out as brilliant. But it's there's so much quality, you know, compared to what was other stuff that was coming out at this sort of time. It really was a step above most other pop music at this sort of time. So anyway, I did say I was going to go through these relatively quickly and then waffled for quite a long time. But anyway, this is the next one I want to be sharing. This is the newest Prince album I picked up. This album came out after Prince had passed on. This is relatively new. I think it only came out 2021. So it's not a particularly old album, and it's a previously unreleased album from Prince's Legendary Vault. And yeah, it's 12 studio recordings. And one of the things that just strikes me about this is it says there, unreleased tracks, and it has a song on here called When She Comes. I'm going to be showing an album just after this one which actually has that song on it. So yeah, I don't know if it's a different version and that kind of thing. I need to listen to these albums a lot more really, and I probably will do a Prince ranking video one day. You know, because I'm very close to getting owning a complete physical collection of his stuff. But yeah, pick this up on eBay. Actually, the CD is actually missing some of my CD player still. I'm still currently you know, giving it the works, you know, giving it a spin. But yeah, I picked this up on eBay. It was really cheap, brand new sealed copy. And I was tempted for quite a while to pick this up on vinyl. That was one of the things that kind of stopped me picking this up sooner, because it's like a three-sided, I believe, a three-sided album, which I thought was kind of. I don't actually own any three-sided records, so yeah, I thought maybe picking this up. In the end, I just went for the cheapo option and picked her up on CD, and it was like $3.99, something like that, you know, on eBay, and it's, you know, similar to the other album, you know, Phase One. I picked that up for about the same sort of price, and it was second hand. So yeah, we'll move on to Hit and Run Phase 2. This is the final album Prince released in his lifetime, 2016. I'm looking at the back of this. I believe this is the album. Yeah, When She Comes. This album also has When She Comes, so I'm not too sure why, you know, you know, which version should I say of When She Comes, if this is the same version on this one, because it does say previously unreleased and yet it appears on this album. But anyway, I haven't had these albums very long. I haven't been able to assess everything and read up about every single thing about them. But yeah, this is a pretty good album for Prince to go out on. Really, you know, it's you know, he put this out not long before he passed on, and it's nice that it's a good album. You know, he didn't die on a duff album, and you can pick this up on. I picked this up on eBay. It's pretty cheap. It's fairly easy to find. I think what happened is with this compared to the, you know, the Hit and Run Phase One is that, you know, when Prince died, a lot of people went out and bought Prince stuff, and this was still doing the rounds, I guess. So I guess it sold a lot more copies than Phase One. You know, there was a spike in interest in Prince. So yeah, I guess this helps sell this album a bit more for tragic reasons, of course. But yeah, it's a pretty good album. It's got some good quality to it. I think it maybe is a step above Phase One, and yeah, it's a good album. It's definitely an album that probably, you know, won't be at the bottom of, you know, not to give anything away, but won't be near the bottom of the ranking. But then again, you know, there's so much quality in Prince's you know, his back catalogue that it's going to be tricky to pick out his worst album. Quite honestly, I'm struggling to think of what his worst album is. So I'll move on now to some Beatles related stuff. You know, I've been trying to get a complete Beatles, you know, solo Beatles collection, you know, done, and you know, finally make that ranking video of solo Beatles. And this is another step closer. That is Paul McCartney's Kisses on the Bottom. This is the one album where I thought maybe I'll miss this one out, because, you know, I heard about it and it's like a load of old standards and that kind of thing, you know, cover songs. But you know what, I really do like this album. It's a very cozy album. You know, you can put this on and just chill out. You know, listen to this album. You know, I've been listening to a lot of stuff while I've been going to work and coming back from work, and you know, you have a bit of a stressful day at work, and then listen to this, and it's kind of, you know, it kind of removes all the stress. You know, pulls all the stress from your mind and all that kind of thing. So yeah, nice, nice little record that I didn't think I'd enjoy as much as I have. So yeah, nice, nice release. And I picked this up on eBay. It's like a couple of pounds. So yeah, another step closer to Paul McCartney. Actually, at this point in time, I do own all of Paul McCartney's pop rock albums. I just have one more album from a solo Beatle to pick up. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be showing it in this video because I haven't got it yet, but it's a George Harrison album. We'll move on to this. This is Paul McCartney's new album, one of his latest ones. This is from, what was it, 2013. And the first few times I'll listen to this, I couldn't really get behind it, really. It just didn't really do anything for me. And then after like the fourth or fifth listen, it kind of, you know, I was sort of determined to kind of get into this album and to maybe appreciate anything, uh, which is kind of funny, really. I just, as I said, appreciate one of the songs on here, number 7, is called Appreciate. But yeah, that's I suddenly started to, you know, finally appreciate this album, and I picked it up brand new on eBay. It was a couple of pounds. and yeah, kind of very happy to finally check this one out, because this is the one this is the one where I feel like uh, Paul McCartney, he tried to pull out something with a bit of a new production. It's not just another, with a modern production for the time. It's getting on a little bit, this album now, but a more sort of new, hence the name, a more new sort of feel to it. And I think that's one of the things that maybe didn't really like about it at first. One of the things that I maybe want to mention now before I forget, because I probably will by the time I make the ranking video of all these, is one of the things that I don't like about this album is sometimes there'll be like a really good instrumental. For instance, like there's a track on here, I have no idea which one it is, but there's like a guitar, there's like a really good tone of a guitar playing, and it's great and it sounds really good. But then it's really short as well. He doesn't really, it's one thing I've noticed about not that I listen to a lot of modern music, but to a degree, they don't really let the music sort of, the instrumentals kind of play out. You get an instrumental these days, generally speaking, of course, it's kind of very short. And I feel like if this was something from the 70s, he'd have played their out a little bit more, from the 80s or whatever. He'd have played their out a little bit more, and it would have been, it just would have had more of a feature in the actual track. So yeah, when you got really good production that Paul McCartney has got, I think it's a bit of a shame, really. You just get like a blink and you'll miss it kind of little piece. It's kind of a bit of a shame, really. So we'll move on to this. This is called Flaming Pie, and it's from 1997. I picked this up on eBay. It was, I seem to be saying this a lot. I apologise, but I picked this up on eBay. It was a couple of pounds, second hand. It comes with these sort of cards with the track list, and I'm not sure what this is all about. I'm sure if this was a library copy or something. Maybe it was, but it was like £2 this album, and it was, it it's in good shape mostly. It was a bit strange, these little cards. I'm not sure what they're all about, but yeah, this is I'm not going to ruin too much by saying this is an album which is not going to be at the bottom of the ranking of my my ranking list of all these albums. This is a pretty damn good album. Some really surprised me how good some of the stuff is on this album. It's been a little while since I listened to it. I've had it for a few months now. But yeah, there's bits and pieces on this which is very, very good. I might be leaning towards the idea that this is possibly Paul McCartney's last truly good release. I'm not sure if that's the case at this point. I need more time, but that's the kind of feeling that I've got at this point. So the final thing I'm going to be showing in this kind of belated video, but it's turning out kind of elongated video at the same time. This is the Russian album. Of course, somewhat controversial, Russia these days, but anyway, we'll not go there. It's not a political video. This is a strange oddity. I've never really got my head around this album, even to this point. I own it and I've listened to this a few times. This was brand new on eBay. Again, I picked it up for a few pounds. It wasn't very expensive. Same old routine. And I guess somebody was selling a job lot of these, and reduced price. And strange, it opens up top almost like the White Album, the original version of the White Album. And when I got this, I opened it up and looked inside and saw this and thought, this looks a bit kind of like a weird bootleg almost. What the hell is this? A counterfeit copy? Because I just sort of saw it and thought, if it's going cheap, let's buy it. And I thought, with this being kind of papery and sort of a bit cheap, I thought, oh, it's like a fake copy. Well, it's not. It's a genuine copy, which is nice. I bought David Bowie box sets, somewhat recently, and they all turned out to be fakes. But this is, I believe anyway, genuine. And this is a strange release. It really is. I don't really, to this point in time, still really understand what it's all about. Came out, I believe, was it 1986, something like that. Sometime in the 80s for the Soviet Union. And it's a load of rock and roll covers that Paul recorded live in a studio, not live in in an audience like a gig or anything, a concert. He recorded them in a studio, so you get a lot of. It's kind of a very antiquated way of recording music. So you get a lot of instruments and things like that bleeding into each other, rather than recording them in isolation from each other, which is the more sort of modern way of doing it. So yeah, one of the things that sticks out for me with this is that, you know, Paul McCartney recorded this in the 80s at a time when a lot of the for instance, you know, a lot of the rock and roll stars, some of them who, you know, maybe appear on this, you know, this album, you know, the original versions, they, you know, the surviving members of, you know, the 50s rock and roll, Roy Orbison, for instance, you know, he in the 80s uh, re-recorded a lot of his music, you know, in a more modern way. It's actually, you know, quite a, you know, because his voice was very good all the way up until, you know, he passed on. So his recordings were actually really, really good. You know, they did in the 80s. Some people actually prefer them to the stuff he did originally, you know, way back when. Some of the artists who survived and re-recorded their stuff in the 80s did a terrible job of it. And it's, you know, just awful. You would never listen to it over the originals. So it was kind of hit and miss. The idea was, you know, you record it in, you know, high tech at the time, 1980s digital process, as opposed to back in the 50s and all that, with very sort of antiquated by you know 80 standards methods. You know, he'd record sometimes with very, you know, old-fashioned methods and that kind of thing. So yeah, Paul actually went against all that, and for this recording anyway, and went back to the old-fashioned way, when a time when, you know, when all the old guys from rock and roll were doing it the modern way, he was doing it the old way. So yeah, and it's rock and roll, so it's kind of all weirdly interconnected. It's a strange release, it really is, and it's one of the most oddest in terms of it's, you know, it's not an odd album to listen to. It's just a bunch of rock and roll, and they're done very well and all that kind of thing. But in terms of it's the way it came about and the fact that it's got the Soviet Union connection to it as well, it's odd. It really is. It's a truly odd album. This, but I do quite like it. It's you know it's called kind of like Paul's, you know, the last album he put out while while he was still relatively young, and he does covers. I don't know why I'm looking at the back because it's in Russian and I can't read Russian, but there's covers of Little Richard, and I couldn't, imagine him being able to do Little Richard, any time later. It's almost like he got it in before his voice started to kind of catch up with him. Age started, smoking and everything started to catch up with him. So yeah, it's a good rock and roll covers album, and but it's a strange one. It's got this really odd, thing in the background, how it's created, and it's, and all that. And I still haven't got my head around why why it is. I'm sure somebody in the comments will probably enlighten me and tell me all I need to know about it. But at this point in time, I haven't done my research on it. I need to get down to, assessing all these albums and kind of putting them in some sort of degree of you know, ranking organization and that kind of thing. So I'll get round to that. I've got one more, like I said, I've got one more album to get my hands on. It's a George Harrison album, Somewhere in England. It's the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle, effectively. So when I got my hands on that, the copies I've had my eye on have evaded me. It's actually a pretty tricky album to get your hands on, I've noticed, because it just didn't sell initially when it came out. It came out in the early 80s and it wasn't a big hit. I'll be able to get my hands on it eventually. It's not super rare or super hard to find. I've just been trying to find a cheap copy that's in the best shape possible, and I've kind of been, having to sometimes when you want to do that with things, particularly if something's a little bit rare to a degree, you kind of got to be a bit patient. So I've got to, keep my eye out for a copy, keep my eye out on eBay and that sort of thing. I don't think I've ever seen a copy of Somewhere in England uh, in the wild. It's just never popped up. Besides the modern reissue that came out some years ago, maybe I should have bought a copy of that when it was new. I always thought, oh, there's loads of copies out there. It'll be dead easy to find. Obviously not. Clearly not. So I'll find a copy one day, and I'll finally get round to that ranking video, which I've been threatening to do and going on about for 150,000 years. So that'll do for this video. 30-minute, waffle and a couple of records. That's only the best for this channel, of course. So yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. I've got a few more bits I want to get my hands on. There's a book by James Griffiths which I'm very close to getting my hands on. book about he wrote about Queen. I will get my hands on that. If you're watching, James, I will get my hands on that very soon. Even though I've got 3 million books currently that my brother gave me that I need to read. I haven't even read that Chili Peppers book that I showed First and Foremost, and I've had that since Christmas. So yeah, I'll probably get round to reading James's Queen book, probably by 2050, something like that. But anyway, thanks for watching, everyone, and goodbye.